My basic approach to clean, healthy living is eat well, sleep well, and try not to induce too much stress into your life. Stress kills.
Fans thought they knew Mike Hall. They watched him fight for every old car, laugh through the chaos, and pour everything he had into Rust Valley. Then, without warning, he was gone. The man who never walked away from anything suddenly disappeared from the show that made him a legend. Viewers were left confused and scared, wondering if something terrible had happened. People searched for answers, but nothing made sense. The truth behind his disappearance is far more painful than anyone expected. To understand how this strange situation became real, we must go back to where the obsession first began, long before the cameras ever arrived. Mike Hall was born on February 4, 1958, in St. Boniface, Winnipeg. His early life was ordinary until his father accepted a job with the Canadian Pacific Railway. That job forced the family to move across the country to Kamloops, British Columbia. This move changed everything for Mike because Kamloops was filled with open back roads, empty fields, and old properties where forgotten cars had been left behind. These abandoned machines became the center of his world before he even understood why. He did not want to strip them for parts or sell them. He wanted to save them from being destroyed and hoped he could bring them back to life one day, even if he did not yet know how. That idea became the purpose behind every car he ever dragged home. As soon as Mike was old enough to explore on his own, he began wandering through rural areas looking for old vehicles. He noticed rusted cars sitting behind barns, broken trucks sinking into the ground, and piles of damaged metal that no one else cared about. He felt drawn to them in a way he could not explain. The rust, the dents, and the missing parts did not scare him. They interested him. He wanted to see more, touch more, and understand how these dead cars had once lived. He believed forgotten cars deserved a second chance, even if he had no idea how to fix them yet. By the early 1970s, while other teenagers focused on normal activities, Mike was sneaking into backyards so he could look at abandoned vehicles. He moved along fence lines and checked every hidden corner of a property because he never wanted to miss a single car. If he found something he could pull home, he did it. He dragged junkers down the road even when people stared at him from their windows. None of the cars he collected were valuable. Most were covered in rust, missing parts, or completely dead, but that only made him more determined to save them. He hated seeing a car left to rot, and he felt responsible for rescuing as many as he could. His friends could not understand his obsession. They asked why he spent his time collecting wrecks instead of doing what everyone else did. Neighbors watched him with confused looks when he brought home another broken vehicle. People thought it was strange, but Mike didn't care. He knew what he wanted long before most people his age even thought about their future. He wanted cars, and not just working cars. He wanted the forgotten ones. By the time he reached adulthood, he had already begun building the foundation of the massive collection he would become famous for. The path of his life was set early. Rust pulled him in and never let him go. By the late 1970s, Mike Hall had entered adulthood with more cars than most people see in a lifetime. None of them ran. None of them were easy. And he had no formal training, no trade school lessons, and no mechanic standing beside him to explain what to do when something broke. He learned everything the hard way, and the hard way came with pain. He spent long nights alone in cold sheds, trying to breathe life into dead engines he barely understood. Some nights he pulled a motor apart only to realize he had made the problem worse. He connected wires in the wrong places. He stripped bolts because he used the wrong tools. He poured hours into rusted panels that fell apart the moment he touched them. Every mistake hit him with the same sinking feeling. He questioned himself, felt the weight of frustration, and pushed through anyway. There were moments when he smashed his knuckles against metal and had to wipe the blood on his jeans. Some repairs exploded in his face. Some repairs drained entire weekends. He burned out tools, cracked parts he had just bought, and ruined pieces he could not afford to replace. Each failure stung, but it also taught him something new. He started to understand the way old wiring behaved. He learned how engines breathed. He learned how rust spread through metal. Nothing came easy. When most people walked away from a project that refused to start, Mike stayed. He tried again, even when it meant undoing hours of work. There were nights he fell asleep on a cold floor beside a car he could not fix. But then, eventually, something would click. A dead engine would sputter. A light would turn on. A wheel would finally move. These victories were small, but to him they felt huge. He earned every skill with pain, persistence, and stubbornness. By the time he reached his early 20s, he had already built a level of experience that no classroom could have given him. He learned through failure, and he carried those lessons like scars. This raw, honest foundation became the spirit of Rust Bros decades later. Viewers loved him because he was real. He had lived every struggle he showed on screen. But while Mike rebuilt wrecks at night, he lived a very different life during the day. It was a life filled with cliffs, explosives, and danger. And it was during those years that he gained a nickname that would follow him forever. By the early 1980s, Mike Hall had moved far beyond the quiet sheds where he fought with frozen engines and stripped bolts. He needed money, and he needed a lot of it, because every rusted car he dragged home demanded parts, tools, and time. That need pushed him into one of the most dangerous careers in British Columbia. He launched Chimera Springs Rockworks, a blasting company that handled the jobs most people were terrified to even stand near. Mike spent his days hanging off cliffs with nothing but ropes, a drill, and explosive charges strapped to his belt. He worked above highways, on raw mountain faces, and in places where one wrong move could cost him his life. He drilled into rock while winds pushed him sideways. He yelled instructions over the roar of machines. He wiped dust out of his eyes while trying to judge the perfect spot to place a charge. It did not take long for people to notice him. Mike showed up to blasting sites with long dreadlocks swinging behind him. The look, combined with the explosions he set off, earned him a nickname that stuck for the rest of his life. People began calling him Rasta Blasta. It made him laugh, but it also fit him. He was the man who blew up mountains. The money from blasting came fast. Some days he walked away filthy, bruised, and covered in dust. But he also walked away with enough cash to feed his growing addiction. Every paycheck went straight into junk cars. Mike bought everything he could get his hands on. He did not limit himself to one type. He bought muscle cars with torn seats and missing motors. He bought old pickup trucks that barely had frames left. He bought European classics that had not run in decades. If something looked forgotten or abandoned, he wanted it. His co-workers sometimes yelled at him to slow down, but he never listened. He would finish a dangerous job in the mountains, wipe the sweat off his face, climb into his truck, and drive hours out of his way just to pick up another wreck. Some nights he returned home exhausted and hurting from the blasting work, but he still forced himself to drag a dead car onto his property. He felt alive in those moments even when his body felt broken. Collecting rust became a second life, a place where he could escape the danger of blasting and the pressures he carried on his shoulders. By the time the 2010s arrived, his collection had exploded past 400 vehicles. The cars filled every corner of his land. They sat in long rows, stacked memories of his long days and painful nights. He kept going because each purchase gave him the same feeling he had as a teenager when he dragged his first junker home. It was a mix of excitement, pride, and escape. But even as his collection grew into a metal forest, his personal world remained surprisingly quiet. That silence would not last. The cars were about to take over everything he loved. By the early 1980s, Mike Hall had moved far beyond the quiet sheds where he fought with frozen engines and stripped bolts. He needed money, and he needed a lot of it because every rusted car he dragged home demanded parts, tools, and time. That need pushed him into one of the most dangerous careers in British Columbia. He launched Chimera Springs Rockworks, a blasting company that cleared dangerous rock slides, broke apart unstable cliffs, and removed solid rock that blocked roads or construction sites. It was work that required explosives to solve problems most people were too afraid to even approach. Mike spent his days hanging off cliffs with nothing but ropes, a drill, and explosive charges strapped to his belt. He worked above highways, on raw mountain faces, and in places where one wrong move could cost him his life. He drilled into rock while winds pushed him sideways. He yelled instructions over the roar of machines. He wiped dust out of his eyes while trying to judge the perfect spot to place a charge. This was not a safe job. It was a job filled with screams, pressure, fear, and adrenaline. It did not take long for people to notice him. Mike showed up to blasting sites with long dreadlocks swinging behind him. The look, combined with the explosions he set off, earned him a nickname that stuck for the rest of his life. People began calling him Rasta Blasta. It made him laugh, but it also fit him. He was the man who blew up mountains. The money from blasting came fast. Some days he walked away filthy, bruised, and covered in dust. But he also walked away with enough cash to feed his growing addiction. Every paycheck went straight into junk cars. Mike bought everything he could get his hands on. He did not limit himself to one type. He bought muscle cars with torn seats and missing motors. He bought old pickup trucks that barely had frames left. He bought European classics that had not run in decades. If something looked forgotten or abandoned, he wanted it. His co-workers sometimes yelled at him to slow down, but he never listened. He would finish a dangerous job in the mountains, wipe the sweat off his face, climb into his truck, and drive hours out of his way just to pick up another wreck. Some nights he returned home exhausted and hurting from the blasting work, but he still forced himself to drag a dead car onto his property. He felt alive in those moments, even when his body felt broken. By the time the 2010s arrived, his collection had exploded past 400 vehicles. The cars filled every corner of his land. They sat in long rows, stacked memories of his long days and painful nights. He kept going because each purchase gave him the same feeling he had as a teenager when he dragged his first junker home. It was a mix of excitement, pride, and escape. But even as his collection grew larger and more overwhelming with every passing year, his personal world remained surprisingly quiet. He tried to keep the chaos of his growing car obsession away from the people he loved. But the pressure of hiding it was beginning to build, even if he did not admit it yet. When Mike Hall finally settled in the Shuswap region of British Columbia in the 1980s, he tried to build the quiet life most people his age were heading toward. He bought a farm, married the woman who stood by him through every reckless moment, and started a family. His wife kept her name private, choosing to stay far from the attention that would come years later. Their son, Connor Charman Hall, was born in the 1980s. A small dog named Minnie soon became part of the family as well. From the outside, their life looked peaceful and ordinary. Inside the home, Mike tried to be the husband and father he knew he needed to be. But the same addiction that had taken over his teenage years followed him into adulthood. His wife understood his love for cars, but she also understood the danger of letting it consume their family life. She made one rule that she thought would keep things under control. He was not allowed to turn their farm into a junkyard. No rows of rust, no line of dead engines, no piles of forgotten metal near the house. Mike agreed, but the obsession did not disappear. It simply moved. He bought a separate 5-acre lot in nearby Tappan, not far from the Trans-Canada Highway. That land became the legendary site people would one day call his Field of Dreams. It was a wide, sun-bleached stretch of dirt filled with long-forgotten cars from nearly every decade. Some vehicles were from the 1940s. Others were rotting relics from the 1960s and 1970s. Many were missing parts or buried in weeds, but Mike saw them the same way he did when he was a boy. They were machines waiting for a second life. In the 2000s, he lived a double life that grew more intense every year. He blasted rock during the day to earn money, and at night he disappeared into his Tappan yard to work on the cars no one else cared about. These two worlds collided constantly and created the quiet storm that would eventually lead to his downfall. And then, fate intervened in a way he never expected when a disaster in 2016 put Mike Hall in front of cameras for the first time. In 2016, a massive rock slide slammed into a British Columbia highway and shut it down without warning. People needed someone who knew how to deal with cliffs that could kill a man in seconds. They needed Mike Hall. When the call came in, Mike felt the familiar surge of pressure in his chest. He knew the risks. He had been hurt before. He had seen blasts go wrong, but he also knew no one else could clear the slide fast enough. He grabbed his gear, loaded his ropes, and drove straight to the site. When he arrived, the noise hit him first. Cracking rock, engines rumbling, workers yelling. But what caught him off guard was the group of cameras pointed at the slide. The Discovery Channel crew from Highway Through Hell had been filming nearby and had rushed to capture the event. Mike had not planned on being filmed. He just wanted to clear the dangerous mess lying across the road. He climbed the unstable rock face with shaking arms, testing each foothold while knowing one wrong step could throw him off the cliff. At the top, he drilled deep into the rock and shoved explosive charges into the holes. Dust coated his face. Sweat dripped into his eyes. He could hear people shouting from below to be careful, but he pushed through the fear. This was the work he had done for decades. When he triggered the blast, the entire mountainside shook. The explosion ripped through the slide with a violent force that made some workers scream. Huge slabs of rock shattered into pieces. The air filled with smoke and flying debris. Mike stumbled back from the blast zone, breathing hard, feeling the shock hit through his body. Someone yelled that the blast had cleared the road. Someone else cheered. Mike stood there, exhausted but relieved, knowing he had done what he came to do. Down below, the film crew had been capturing everything. They recorded his confidence, his intensity, and the sharp focus in his eyes. People watching Highway Through Hell later that year immediately noticed him. He had a presence that made viewers stop and pay attention. Many people commented that it was the kind of presence you do not forget once you see it. The kind that makes it hard to imagine him ever disappearing from anything he becomes part of. Producer Tyson Hepburn took even more interest. He had met Mike before, but seeing him on camera in that moment made him realize Mike was not just another worker on a dangerous job. Tyson began asking about Mike's background and the massive car collection he kept hidden in Tappan. That rock slide became the spark for something much bigger. It was the moment that put Mike Hall on the path to becoming the face of a show that millions would later watch, admire, and become attached to. It was also the moment that planted the seeds of the future mystery people still talk about. How could someone with this much personality and this much impact ever seem to disappear from that show without warning? The cameras eventually left the mountains, but they did not forget Mike. Once the world heard about the hundreds of cars he kept hidden in Tappan, everything around him began to shift toward a future he never expected. By 2016, Mike Hall was overwhelmed. His Tappan property was buried under hundreds of old cars, and the weight of maintaining them was becoming too much. For the first time in his life, he thought about walking away. He decided to sell everything, not one car at a time, but the entire property and collection as one package. He listed the land and the cars for $1.19 million, a price that reflected 40 years of his life. No one showed serious interest. Most people said the property looked more like a scrapyard than a business opportunity. Instead of lowering the price, Mike increased it. In 2017, he relisted everything for $1.45 million. This decision shocked everyone, and it changed everything. The listing went viral. People who had never met him wanted to know why someone would collect so many dead cars. The more attention he got, the more producers began to call. Television companies pitched ideas. Some wanted a show built on chaos and shock value. Mike rejected anything that made him look like a joke. He insisted that if he was going to appear on television, the show had to be meaningful. It had to focus on restoring old cars and doing something positive with the mountain of rust he had built. With help from producers at Mayhem Entertainment and Chorus Studios, Mike built a real shop on his Tappan property and named it Rust Bros Restorations. He brought in the people he trusted most. Avery became the loud, skilled mechanic who could fix anything. Connor became the steady voice who tried to keep the finances under control. Cassidy handled the bodywork. Sarah tracked down parts. Filming began in 2018. On December 6, 2018, Rust Valley Restorers premiered on the History Channel. It was an instant hit. In 2019, Netflix picked it up and introduced Mike to viewers all over the world. Tourists started driving to Tappan just to see the cars and meet the Rust Bros crew. Fans became hooked on the emotional bond between Mike and his son. Avery's colorful personality led to another show, Backroad Truckers. Everything was growing fast, almost too fast. But while the world fell in love with Rust Valley, problems were already forming behind the scenes, and they were about to tear Mike out of his own kingdom in the most painful way imaginable. By 2020, viewers saw Rust Valley Restorers as a fun escape. They laughed at the arguments, enjoyed the dramatic repairs, and admired Mike's unstoppable passion. What they never saw was the quiet collapse happening out of sight. Rust Brothers was drowning in debt. Mike had poured nearly $2 million of his personal savings into the shop, and almost none of it returned. Every car cost more than he could sell it for. Every build dug the hole deeper. Every month pushed him closer to breaking. At the same time, Mike's body was giving out. The years of blasting rock had eaten away at his strength. He woke up sore. He worked through pain. Some days he struggled just to keep going. The fear of dying young stayed with him. His father died at 60, and Mike knew he was approaching the same age. The thought crushed him. If he suddenly collapsed, his wife and son would be left with hundreds of cars they never wanted and a failing shop they could not save. Then the zoning crisis exploded. The land where Rust Brothers stood was legally reserved for farming, not for running a restoration shop. For years, no one said anything. But in early 2021, when Mike built a bigger workshop, officials showed up and told him he was breaking the law. He fought as hard as he could. He filed paperwork, wrote letters, and begged for permission to stay open. Local leaders supported him, but in May 2023, the Agricultural Land Commission denied the exemption. The shop he built for the show was now officially illegal. And it got worse. Mike no longer owned the land. He had sold it under financial pressure and was now just a tenant with no power. Everything he worked for was suddenly in someone else's hands. Then came the wildfires. In the summer of 2021, real fires tore through British Columbia. Weeks of extreme heat and almost no rain turned forests and fields into fuel, and flames spread across the province. The dry brush around Mike's yard became dangerous. One spark could erase his entire life's work in minutes. He stayed awake at night listening for sirens, knowing he might lose everything before morning. Unfortunately, things would only get worse. By mid-2021, Mike Hall was trapped. The land was no longer his, and the legal pressure would not stop. The wildfires moved closer every week. Mike realized he could no longer protect the empire he had built. With no other choice, he sold the Tappan property. The cars were not part of the sale. He had to move them or lose them. That decision led to one of the most painful days of his life. He planned the massive auction in October 2021. More than 500 cars were listed. Many of them had been with him for 30 or 40 years. These cars, pieces of his past. Now they were lined up in rows, waiting to be taken by strangers. People moved quietly as they walked between the rows of rusted cars. Some leaned in close and spoke in low voices about the chance to get a cheap deal. Others looked around with confused faces and asked why this was happening at all. A few pointed at the long lines of vehicles and wondered why he would sell every single car after spending 40 years collecting them. Another person asked, "Did something happen to him?" Someone else wondered aloud, "Is the show over and he is shutting everything down?" A few even asked, "Did he run out of money?" The questions spread through the crowd, and the confusion made the atmosphere tense and unsettling. This was not a normal auction. It looked like the end of a life. Mike stood in the middle of the yard and forced a smile, but it did not hide the exhaustion in his eyes. This was the day his Rust Kingdom died. Mike tried to stay strong, but each sale hit him in a place he could not hide. Some cars sold for a few $100s, others sold for more. It did not matter. Watching them leave was the part that broke him. By the end of the day, more than 500 vehicles were gone. Only about 30 of his favorites remained. The yard that once held his life's work was nearly empty. Viewers watching the heartbreaking Season 4 episode saw every painful moment. They saw him break down and struggle to breathe through the loss. The episode looked like a goodbye. Fans believed the show was over. They believed Mike had walked away. Many believed Rust Valley was dead. To the world, it looked like Mike Hall had disappeared. But soon everyone would get the shock of their lives. When Season 5 finally premiered in the fall of 2024, viewers could not believe what they were seeing. Mike Hall was back on their screens, standing in a new shop, on new land, working with a smaller team and a smaller collection. After the painful auction in 2021 and the Season 4 farewell in 2022, most people believed he had walked away forever. Now he was restoring a Shelby GT 350 and a 1941 Diamond T truck as if nothing had happened. The new episodes showed a different rhythm of life. The chaos of the old yard was gone. The fear of fires, debt, and zoning officers storming in was gone. Mike worked slower. He rested more. He seemed happier. Off camera, Mike had built a new purpose. He became an ambassador for eBay Motors Canada and gave online advice to people searching for parts or trying to start their first restoration. He spent more time talking to young mechanics and helping them learn the same lessons he learned the hard way. He attended car shows around British Columbia, shook hands with fans, and shared stories about the old days. He was still living in the shoe swap with his wife and his dog. Connor remained by his side, helping him run the leaner and calmer version of Rust Brothers Restorations. Make sure to click the cards on the screen now for more interesting videos. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.